I was thinking today of all the great men and women that I've been privileged to meet, to talk with in my lifetime. And I began to ponder who would be the greatest among them all if history looks back upon all of these meetings. And I decided after considerable thought that it would be a little slice of time in my past when, as a 9-year-old boy, I met a former slave by the name of Robinson Crusoe Buck. It happened on a Saturday morning, a sunny day. Then my daddy said to me, "Son, we need to go to a parade, and I want you to see a former slave, Robinson Crusoe Buck." So we walked the several blocks to the parade route. And it wasn't long after floats and other automobiles had gone by that suddenly there was a huge roar of the crowd, and I saw an open convertible as it came by us on the parade route. And in the back seat was this lean, tall, handsome, bronze-skinned gentleman with a broad smile on his face. And my daddy, with pride, said, "That is Robinson Crusoe Buck, son. I wanted you to see him." Well, all of a sudden, the car came to a stop directly in front of me. And to my amazement, and now I'm glad, that gentleman with that bronze hand reached over the side of that convertible toward me. I impulsively put my hand toward his, and he said, "Good morning, son. Have a good day," with a smile as big as all outdoors. Well, who was Robinson Crusoe Buck? Yes, he was a former slave, born in 1844 in Livingston, Tennessee, Overton County, Tennessee. And he was raised on the farm that had been bought by a German businessman who had come to the area. And that German businessman ultimately had 40 slaves working on that farm. Now, slavery was hideous, and there is no justification for it. But it was in vogue in those days, and on that farm worked the woman and her husband who would eventually become the parents of Robinson Crusoe Buck in 1844. And he was born. And the German businessman's name was Abraham Buck. Why he named this little boy Robinson Crusoe Buck, no one knows. But he was born. Another side note, Abraham Buck, his owner, his wife had a baby the very next day, and the two babies lay side by side in a little crib quite often. Well, the years went by. The Civil War was concluded. Robinson Crusoe Buck, at the age of 28 or 29, married a beautiful young lady. Into that union, several children and grandchildren were born. In the years following the Civil War, Robinson Crusoe Buck and his young family decided their fortune would be best served as a free man now if they moved to a little larger town, Cookeville, Tennessee, my hometown. And there he opened a livery stable and became quite successful as a businessman, and everybody loved him and they respected him. In course of time, in that livery stable business, he met a young politician who later became the United States Secretary of State, Cordell Hull. Mr. Hull and Mr. Buck became extremely close, the dearest of friends. And finally one day, the Secretary of State just practically forced Robinson Crusoe Buck to agree to go with him to Washington, the capital. And so they did. And Robinson Crusoe Buck was given a tour of the White House and sat down and spoke for a while with the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and his wife Eleanor. Later, he toured the halls of Congress, and one of his great highlights was to go to Ford Theater, where President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, and to sit in the very chair that Abraham Lincoln was seated in when he was killed. And then he returned home. It wasn't long until his wife passed away, several years later at the age of 99. He remarried a wonderful, wonderful lady. He lived to be 109 years old. He was approximately that age when I met him. I'd only been saved as an 8-year-old for less than a year, and I was in the early part of my 9th year. Later, a few months after the parade in which I met him, Robinson Crusoe Buck would also die. Some say that he wasn't 109, that he was at least 115. We just don't know. But what was it about Robinson Crusoe Buck that made people applaud him so much? Being a former slave was probably ample reason, and to be that age. But there was something else about him. Whenever he was asked the secret of his long life, he would say, "Daily love God with all your heart, love yourself, and love everyone you meet, including your enemies." That was his motto. That's what he said everywhere. And he shared Jesus Christ with everybody. It's an interesting fact that later in his life, the slave owner who had owned Robinson Crusoe Buck became very ill. He knew he needed to make things right with God, so who did he call? A former slave that he had owned, Robinson Crusoe Buck, who dropped everything that he was doing, went to the man's bedside, spent several days with him, tending to his every need, and talking to him about how much Jesus had loved him and had died for him and wanted him to be saved. As a result of that, he led his former slave owner to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. Abraham Buck's family asked Robinson Crusoe Buck to do the eulogy at his funeral. And he told them there, as he told everyone, "You want to be happy? You want to really be happy? Daily love God with all your heart. Love yourself and love everyone you meet, including your enemies." Can you imagine that? Here was a man who had every reason to be bitter. Here was a man who had every reason to be resentful against his former owner. But instead of doing that, he loved him and led him to Jesus Christ. That made a mark on this young lad, me, who would one day be a preacher. I believe Robinson Crusoe Buck's words ring in my heart daily, even when I don't even recognize it. Daily love God with all your heart, Harold. Love God with all your heart. Love yourself. And love everyone you meet, including your enemies. What a great motto. We can all use that. The most momentous time perhaps in my lifetime, in fact, I believe it to be so, was that brief, extraordinarily brief meeting with a former slave who was honored because he was a soul winner. But isn't that the word of God being lived out? He that winneth souls is wise. Robinson Crusoe Buck was wise. May it be said of us also when we die. This is Evangelist Harold Hunter. If you've enjoyed this, please share it. And if you haven't already subscribed, do you see the little red word subscribe at the bottom of the screen? Please do that. That'll help us as we serve the Lord together. Thank you for watching.